بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. This is going to be a series in which I speak about language interpreting between English and Arabic, of course. So for those who are new to this channel, my name is Mohammed and I am an interpreter. I have been working as an interpreter since 2004 and I have taught as well simultaneous and consecutive interpreting over the years. This is just a brief idea about who I am. Now, several people talk to me about interpreting and they would like to know how to become interpreters, how to find interpreting jobs. There are several questions, a lot of the questions indeed. And every now and then I feel really confused, and the simplest question I find it very difficult to answer. Let me just explain something to you, something very important to you. I'm not only an interpreter but also a researcher, and I do research on interpreting, scientific research. And when we say scientific research, we're talking about subjective, about objective. And when I try to give an answer, I try my best to give the best answer, something that I strongly believe in, something that has been proven by experience. But again, there is a problem. If something applies to me, does it apply to you? I cannot really guarantee that. There is something else that bothers me a lot. If somebody asks me about skills or competence or whatsoever related to language interpreting or professionalization, education, etc., still I'm talking about English and Arabic. I'm not talking about other languages. I don't speak other languages. If I spoke French, for example, probably I would have been able to see other strategies in interpreting, and my perceptions would have become broader, because reality as I see it is totally different from the reality that other people could see it. Now, what happens is that many people ask me questions, and I find it sometimes really difficult to answer these questions because of these limitations that we have. So, how about having this series, I said to myself, and I thought that I could solve the problem of subjectivity and objectivity by trying just to make some kind of introspection, just to tell you honestly, sincerely, everything that I feel and everything that I did in the past concerning language interpreting. So instead of saying to you, you should do this, you should do that, what I want to say to you is that I did this, I did that, and then you are going to be the arbiter, you're going to be the person who can accept or reject everything that I say. Now, with this being said, this is the first episode that you're having at the moment, you're watching at the moment, and we will start with this introduction. Usually, people who teach introductory courses like this one follow the procedure of trying to lay down the foundations, the concepts or theoretical framework, and try to give you new information that you might have otherwise not have possessed for one reason or another. And this is something that I do in some cases. However, for this exercise, for this episode, and for this series as well, what I thought of doing is to do some kind of introspection, just to try to find something from the inside, the mental, the emotional state inside me, and try to get it outside myself in order to share with you this experience. For that reason, what I'm going to do is to imagine the questions that you're asking, to ask them and to answer these questions. So I am now trying to imagine somebody conducting an interview with me, and he's asking questions, so I'm going to answer these questions. Let's begin now with these questions. I recorded them and you will listen to them now. Let's see our first question.
I am still a student and wish one day to become an interpreter. My first question is it useful for me to receive training from a professional interpreter? Is that the only way or best way to my professionalization?
Now this is the first question, the very first question that everybody would ask me when talking to me about interpreting and how to become an interpreter. Let me just try to remember what happened in the past and how students approached me and asked me this question. There would be a student, and that student would come to me, and this is what happened in fact, and would receive a training, for example, in a course or whatsoever, and then he would be frustrated by saying the following. He would say, I have never learned anything in my university, and now what you're teaching me is something that I haven't learned throughout my study at the university. It's something very new, and it seems to be that I have wasted my time. This is something that many students have said to me, and this is my answer to them. What's the difference between learning something at the university and learning something from the professional interpreter? Let me just explain this, and this is the way exactly that I answered many students. I answered them in this way. I told them the following. Education in formal institutions like the university is based on science, is based on research. What we mean by research, it is a scientific study that a person tries to make on specific samples or specific people, participants, and he tries to address a very specific issue in interpreting in our case, and then after applying the solid foundations of science, he finds out conclusions, and then he echoes his voice and gives his opinion. Now after that, he takes this research and have it reviewed by other people, by researchers in other words, and they decide whether he has followed the correct procedures or not. If they approve it, then it becomes a scientific research, and hopefully the results are going to be repeated. Hopefully the results somehow can be generalized. Talking about this, we have to take into consideration that interpreting and translation are two parts of social sciences. Social sciences include a lot of things, including interpreting and translation studies. This is not the same as natural sciences like mathematics, chemistry, and others. Researchers say, this is what I read, and now I try to remember what I read. I read one day in a book about political science something that says that in natural sciences the theories are very well advanced, very fairly advanced theories. However, in practice there is little application. Conversely, in social sciences, the researcher says, applications seems to be more advanced than the theory. So this is the state of the social sciences in terms of application. He says the application is very well advanced, more than the theories. So instead of having a theory and apply it, there is already the application is being there, and we can get the theories out from the application. So this is the problem with the scientific research and application in the social sciences in general, but particularly in the language interpreting issue as we are going to discuss. I still have in my mind your question. Is it feasible to study interpreting at the hands of the interpreter himself? And I'm answering this question first of all that we have to make a distinction between formal education, which is based on scientific research, and the apprenticeship model you're talking about. It's called Apprenticeship Model. That is usually the model where you receive information from a mentor, from a master, and you are a novice in the job. So what's the difference between the two? Mind you, the apprenticeship model has been in place for ages, since antiquity. This is how the carpenter used to teach the novice, or the blacksmith used to teach his novice, etc. So it happens the same with language interpreting until maybe the 1970s, when something has changed there. Anyway, at the university there is a teacher, and this teacher is very careful and very cautious. On the other hand, we have a professional interpreter who doesn't teach. He works. This is his job. His job is to work with the client and to deal with the client. This person just works as an interpreter. But here we have a teacher. The teacher has the arsenal of scientific research findings, although these findings are sometimes limited. On the other hand, the person who is teaching you interpreting under the apprenticeship model is a person who sometimes lacks the scientific research. He doesn't have the scientific research at all, and he doesn't know anything about the findings there. And even when he uses his own skills in interpreting, he uses common sense, he uses the client's instructions, he uses his past experience, but he doesn't say that I am using the science of research. On the other hand, as I said, the teacher at the university is very careful and cautious. He cannot tell you, do this, do that, unless he has something to support his hypothesis. In other words, if you ask him a question that is not answered by research, usually he will not be able to answer this question and will say, I don't know. Or to tell you, for example, let's search for this issue. On the other hand, the mentor is a person who gathered information through experience, and whatever you ask him, usually, as far as I know, the interpreter usually has an answer, and he gives the answer quickly without any kind of hesitation or procrastination. And here it means that he is not very cautious in giving you the answer. He is not very careful in giving you the answer. And even if he doesn't know, he just tries to imagine the answer and give it to you. I'm really talking about that from my own perspective. When I was working as an interpreter and at the same time teaching, interpreting, these things happen into my mind. However, the difference is that I'm already a researcher, so I can make a difference. Sometimes the distinction between the two fields, but sometimes I fail, sometimes my eye is blind, and fortunately I give some kind of prejudiced information to people based on experience, not on science. Here, the teacher in the formal education setting, what happens with him is that when he says something, it's very hard to contradict himself tomorrow, because what he says today is based on research, and what he says tomorrow is based on research. On the other hand, the mentor in the apprenticeship model is a person who can contradict himself, because today he has a client, and the clients tell him something. Because of lack of information and understanding of scientific research, he tends to generalize things and to try to see and to discern some kind of patterns there. Obviously, tomorrow the client changes or other variables change in the profession. What happens is that he contradicts himself because new information comes to him. On the one hand here, we have the teacher who follows research, as I said, and he follows the patterns of research, and he is very cautious concerning generalization. But on the other hand, we have a person who is working as an interpreter, who is earning a living out as an interpreter, and he gathers his information from experience, and this is really short-lived experience. It's sometimes an accumulation of mistakes and errors, but it's very hard for the professional interpreter who is not a researcher to frame them all into a theoretical framework, into a code of conduct. For that reason, he may give you something today that he may contradict to tomorrow. Sometimes he thinks about the ideal situation and teaches you that, but when in action, when he is doing the interpretation job, he's contradicting all the ideas that he has taught you. Now, these are the differences between the two. The apprenticeship model, therefore, is not a replacement at all of the educational system at the formal institutions, at all. And we cannot say even they are complementary to each other. I'm not sure if I can say they are complementary or not, because this is going to be out of courtesy, and sometimes it's misleading to say that they are complementary. The education at the university is the essence, is the basics. That's true. When we talk about the professional interpreter, it has to do with the model. Who is going to be the model of an interpreter trainer? who's going to, what are the qualities, what are the traits, characteristics of that person? Does he know how to teach or not? Is he ready to accept the fact that he's going to be always subjective, so that he has to avoid this subjectivism and tries to be as honest as possible with you concerning what happens, what happens correctly, what doesn't happen, what doesn't work, what works, etc. Now, in the apprenticeship model, is the interpreter trainer going to tell you, or the mentor is going to tell you, do this, don't do that, and don't ask me why, because it's very hard to explain to you? Or is he going really to answer these your questions, or to have some kind of plan with you where you are engaged more with the learning process itself? Well, this is a very difficult question to answer in the ideal situation. We can imagine a person who is going to be an interpreter, and at the same time a person who understands the knowledge of teaching, who understands how the different styles of learning differ from one person to another, and tries to cope with all of these things in order to make sure that he is not leaving anyone behind. He is not leaving any novice frustrated or bored with the things that he is teaching to them. He knows at least some of the principles of teaching, at least. So this is not going to be an easy question to answer, to tell the truth. Whether you want to learn interpreting at the university or through a mentor, at the end of the day, there are two issues of concern. First of all, the scientific principle of teaching is very important, to rely on science, to rely on research. On the other hand, as far as practice is concerned, yes, you do have the right to go there and to see by yourself what's happening in the real world interpreting, and to listen to people. But you have to be careful, and you have to understand that not everything that the mentor says is really applicable or correct necessarily. What happens is that since the mentor is not using scientific research, there is a chance that he's going to tell you many things that are untrue, incorrect, not because he's a liar or not telling the truth, no, but because this is how he perceives reality. It's not the reality as it is, it's reality as he perceives it, which is an illusion sometimes. In this case, you have to be very cautious, and you have to use your brain, use your mind, in order to judge, to make sure whether this works or that works. Let me give you examples now, practical examples. In a training where a mentor is taking charge of you, he could tell you, and this is what happened in many situations that I know, and once again I'm trying just to make introspection and remember really everything that happened in the field in the past years of my experience. I do remember that there was an interpreter, my colleague, who was telling another person, a novice, telling him, please understand that an interpreter has it in himself. It is born with him. It is a gift, and you cannot have this gift. If you don't have it, you cannot have it. Now, if we ask him from a scientific perspective, how did you reach that conclusion, he will not be able to answer this question. So, if you are a novice and you take it for granted what this interpreter has said to you, then I think you are going to put your life in danger, because you are accepting things that are not necessarily valid. Now, another person would say to you, for example, go and train yourself on radio channels, on TV, etc. If you do that, you are in fact violating one of the strategies of teaching, which is called the graduated difficulty strategy. And I have seen many interpreters teaching their novice people that they have joined their training in this way, giving them the most difficult things from the very beginning. This contradicts with the scientific research findings concerning the graduated difficulty strategy, for example, but also other strategies related to the mastery learning, to the interpersonal style of learning, to the self-expressive style of learning, to the concept attainment style of learning. Now, another person or another mentor. I know a mentor who taught his novice that in order for you to concentrate with the people and to speak and listen at the same time, then you have to distract yourself by, for example, training yourself how to turn on your mobile and try to play a game, or to write something on the paper, or to draw something, to make a drawing. This is what the mentor indeed said. And I know this is many people would say like that. However, on the other hand, scientific research from neuroscience, psychology, cognitive psychology almost agrees, there is a consensus among them, that multitasking is not something good for people. And we are humans. Humans are not designed to do multitasking. More than 3 things, we cannot do that. And some people would say that we are doing multitasking because we're listening, decoding, encoding, and speaking. This is what the mentor said, in fact, to his novice, and this is what many people still believe in. Many interpreters still believe that they are doing multitasking by speaking and listening at the same time. On the other hand, scientific research says no. There is a research by, I think, Dr. Ali Darwish from Australia. He says that it is a split second between the listening and the speaking, and this split second is enough for the brain to listen and to speak at what we think to be the same time, but it's not the same time. This is another explanation in scientific research. For that reason, I have some kind of reservations made, in fact, on the apprenticeship model for the time being. Still, however, this is my feeling, and this is a bit prejudiced. What you need to do, this is your question, what you need to do is think carefully and not to take everything for granted. Even what I'm telling you, don't take it for granted. It's good for you to see the apprenticeship approach, to see a mentor and talk to him, and try to see what is useful, what's not useful, what works, what doesn't work, and try to remember all the time that there is scientific research. Scientific research is, I think, more important than the apprenticeship model, and I cannot say they are complementary to each other. I cannot really think so, and I cannot really be honest with myself to say that they are complementary with each other, simply because if the apprenticeship model is not based on science, then it cannot. I don't believe that it can be anything useful. I cannot believe that. However, when you take the apprenticeship model and try to learn interpreting through an apprentice, a master, and you are a novice, probably you have to think about the fact, are you making any progress? If you're not making any progress, then think about it. Probably you are in the wrong track. Probably you are learning things in the wrong way, something that doesn't satisfy your needs, that doesn't make you progress in your career as an interpreter or in your training as an interpreter. This is the first question, and that was my answer. But if you have any other questions, please put them in the comments and I can answer them all. If I can answer them, I will do, of course. The second question.
What are the main types of interpreting?
The second question is about the types of interpreting. We call it typology. Why typology? Because interpreting can be divided into several categories depending on different variables and parameters. Now, first of all, how do we interpret? This is one. And what do we interpret? This is two. These are the two main variables that usually researchers talk about. In my experience, let's go back to my experience and try to imagine how things are happening, and I remember my own experience. This is my experience. Consecutive interpreting. It is where the speaker speaks and you are silent. You just listen or take notes. And then, after he stops talking, you talk. This is called consecutive. And my experience, I try to remember, it was very difficult. Consecutive interpreting is very demanding for me. For me, and not for you, by the way. It's for me. What I talk about myself does not necessarily apply to you or to any other person. Some people would say that consecutive interpreting is very easy for them compared with simultaneous interpreting. It's up to them. It's their feeling, it's their abilities. For me, consecutive interpreting is more demanding than simultaneous interpreting. So, the second type that I worked on is simultaneous interpreting, where you listen and speak almost in real time. And the third one is whispering. You sit beside a person and you whisper into his ears. You interpret what's being said into his ears. The difference between simultaneous interpreting and whispering is that whispering is usually without equipment, simultaneous interpreting is with equipment. In my experience, they are totally different, the challenges are different, and the skills are different. Somehow, there are some commonalities, of course, but the challenges are different also. I may explain that later on. There is also phone interpreting, if you can say. It is phone interpreting is just the mode. It could be simultaneous, it could be consecutive. It is just something that happens, phone interpreting. I've never done that before. I did it only one time I remember, only one time, and it was consecutive. It was consecutive, phone interpreting. We can discuss that later on. And so these are the main types of interpreting. There is another one which I don't remember doing it before. Probably I did it once or twice in a conference, I don't remember. But it's when you read a paper and translate it immediately, spontaneously. This is called sight interpreting. I never did that in official settings, but this is one of the types of interpreting according to mode. There is also another typology of interpreting, which is the topic. So, in my country, Jordan, where I live, we have developmental programs that we translate for educational reform, judicial reform, something like that, developmental issues, or maybe developmental projects for the organizations working in Jordan. There are many organizations there. Developmental. The second one is the humanitarian or human rights issues like gender, like violence, like domestic violence, like workers, laborers and employers, employee, all of these issues that have to do with the human rights or the basic rights of people. And there is also the training form of interpreting, that training form. In other words, that you are engaged in a session about accounting, where somebody is teaching people how to do accounting. I attended that conference. I remember it was a training course about the international standards for accounting and reporting. There could be about the system for the banks, for example. This is also, I was there. It could be about training social workers, for example, how to deal with the people that they ask counseling from them. And I interpreted there, I remember. It is something like a training. So these are the types of interpreting, regarding which one is difficult, which one is easy, which was more enjoyable. For me, this is very personal. I feel very happy when I go to sessions that are interactive, that engage people in the discussions, working groups, breakout sessions, and when they have fun activities, and when my role is going to be like a facilitator more than an interpreter. I not only interpret in those sessions, but I use also to try to explain what's happening. Sometimes I use a free translation or interpreting. In other words, I try to make people understand what's being said rather than sticking to the word. This is what I like usually. I like also to interpret in legal settings, like in a conference talking about legal reform or laws. I like it very much. This is my passion. Law is my passion. And I like really to translate things related to the law. So I don't like accounting. I don't like any economic or financial workshops because they are very much complicated and they cause me lots of headache, although I can do that. Now, as far as the types of interpreting concerning the mode, I feel better at simultaneous interpreting than consecutive. Of course, I can do consecutive interpreting, even without notes sometimes, but I don't like consecutive interpreting. I do simultaneous interpreting, and I do live interpreting on satellite channels. This is what I did several times. There was a channel that I interpreted for on several occasions, and all my interpretation was free of charge, by the way. There, it was just for about a few minutes for an event or something. So in my company, we chose to have some kind of relationship with that channel for some kind of promotion. So we decided to give them this interpretation for free on multiple occasions, maybe a few for them. Anyway, and I like it. I like it very much. The interpretation on the channels, and I don't think that there is anything else that I can talk about concerning your question about the types of interpreting. Of course, when we proceed forward in this series, more questions would come, would pop in my mind maybe, and in your minds as well in the comments. Feel free, please, to ask any question. But I have 6 questions with me. This is the second question. I will stop here at the moment, and we'll meet with you next time with episode number 2. In episode number 2, I'm going to answer question number 3 and question number 4. And then in episode number 3, we will answer questions number 5 and number 6. I beg your pardon. I may not be able to answer in any episode any of the questions that you may put in the comments for the time being. After we finish with the 6 questions, yes, I will be able to take all your comments and make a special recording in order to answer them in full. Remember at the end that what I am doing here is to give you my own experience, which means my own feelings, which means my own personality, my own life. It does not necessarily mean that it applies to you. It could be a lesson to be learned. It could be a way, but not the way. Telling you, instead of saying to you, you should do this, you must do this, I'm telling you, this is what I did. You're the arbiter, and you can use your mind. You can make your judgments and decide whether to take from me this or to leave that. It's up to you. Think wisely, and all the time, just never give your mind to the position of any person in the world. Keep it to yourself. Use it, and never take anything for granted from any person in the world. Think carefully and think wisely. Thank you very much for watching, and hopefully we will meet with you in our next episode. Thank you very much. Bye bye.